Greetings and welcome from the League of Women Voters of Portland. My name is Debbie Kay. I'm the League president. The League is dedicated to making democracy work. One of our core beliefs is that democracy works best when voters are informed about issues and engaged in their communities. For that reason, we present programs like this to give our Portland and Multnomah County neighbors the opportunity to think about the issues that affect our lives and well-being. Our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. I am so proud of our work. The League researched and presented a vast quantity of nonpartisan election information that reached 30,000 voters throughout the community. I very much hope that each of you was one of those voters. Following this important and contentious election, the League wanted to explore the implications for Portland, for the state, and for the nation. We're pleased to have you join this program featuring 4 speakers who have combined many, many years of expertise. They will help us analyze the results and consider what's next. The League is grateful for support from our media partner, Metro East Community Media. They record our community education panels and voter education presentations, and then rebroadcast them on community access channels and social media. Please tell your friends, colleagues, and family to watch this video or listen to the podcast, available through our website, lwvpdx.org, on Friday, December 2nd. This program also receives support from the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation, the Weiss Foundation, and the League of Women Voters of Portland Education Fund. We sincerely thank our speakers and the moderator, the chat facilitator, and all the volunteers who donate their time to make this possible. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight's program, Barbara Dudley. Barbara is a League of Women Voter member and Senior Fellow at Portland State University's Mark O. Hatfield School of Government. Our chat facilitator is James Offsink. James is also a League member who leads our Justice Interest Group. He also serves Multnomah County taxpayers as a tax supervising and conservation commissioner appointed by the governor. Now I'll turn the program over to you, Barbara. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you everyone out there in Zoom land for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing from our panel of experienced political analysts who are going to help us understand some of the implications of the November 8th election for our community, Portland, Multnomah County, but also for our democracy as a whole. Our first panelist is Anna Griffin, the news director for Oregon Public Broadcasting. Before OPB, she spent 11 years as a reporter and editor at the Oregonian and 10 years as a reporter at the Charlotte Observer. Next is John Horvick, Senior Vice President at DHM Research. John serves as a political commentator with expertise in opinion research and community-based politics. He's often quoted in both local media and national publications. Dr. Dan Chi is a visiting assistant professor of political science at Reed College. She writes about race, ethnicity, and identity politics, especially in Asian American politics and immigration, and does research on gender politics, news media, and the government, political behavior, public opinion, and political economy. And finally, but very happy to have you here, Alex. Alex Zielinski is news editor for the Portland Mercury. She writes about economic inequities, police, civil rights, and city politics. She received awards in 2022 for her articles from the Society of Professional Journalism. That is our panel, and we will start by asking our panelists questions from League members. Members of tonight's audience can submit other questions via the chat, and James Offsink will sort them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of the evening. So to move on to our first question for the panel. Here it is. Now that we have had some 3 weeks to digest not just the election results, but the underlying voter data, our question is, what was the biggest surprise or most interesting takeaway for you from this election, and why? We're going to start with Anna Griffin from OPB. We want all of you to try to keep your answers to 3 minutes. I know that's hard, but that will get us through more questions. So Anna, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you to the League and thank you to the panelists. I know it can feel like an uphill push, especially right now, to be somebody with a League of Women Voters, given all the threats facing democracy right now. So just to start us off, thank you for all the work you all do. It's really important. Looking at the results, the thing that surprised me the most was that the Portland charter changes passed, and that they passed by as large a margin as we saw. I think common conventional political wisdom is it's much easier to get people to vote no against something than it is to get them to vote yes on something. This was also a measure that was really, really complicated and really, really wonky. Anytime you say form of government, I think the average voter, their eyes start to glaze over. And then this was a measure that contained multiple parts in a year when there was a lot going on in life and on the ballot. And you had some very deep-pocketed special interests out there and some elected officials in the city of Portland working to defeat this measure and to add to the confusion that people felt toward it. And so I was surprised that after a century with this form of government, Portlanders who tend to like to keep things the way they are and take a certain amount of pride in things being different and quirky here. I mean, we still don't have fluoride in our water, after all. I was surprised both that the changes passed and that they passed by such a solid majority of the vote. So I think that's under 3 minutes.
Yes, that's very provocative reflections. Thanks. And we'll get back to the charter amendments later too. Next, John Horvick from DHM Research.
So this is an election where nationally there's a lot of anticipation about Republicans being successful. Certainly Republicans in Oregon thought that this was an opportunity for them to be successful. And in some respects, depends on what you assumed going in. If you assume something different, maybe you would look at the results differently. But people were unhappy with the direction of the state. The governor's unpopular. You have the Democrats in power in Washington, D.C., and the out party typically does well. You had issues that were not favorable to Democrats, particularly concerns around crime, concerns about the economy. Those are issues that voters tend to say that they trust Republicans more. And so sort of looking at this sort of set of issues, this political environment, and then when you look at where the results, how they came in and just how little difference there was. I mean, we have 3 governor cycles in a row where it's the same 7 counties that have gone Democrat and the same 29 counties that have gone Republican. You look at the margins in the metro area, and that's really the thing that I've been thinking a lot about. In 2018, Governor Brown won Multnomah County by 52 points. Tina Kotek is winning Multnomah County by 53. In 2018, Governor Brown won Washington County by 16. Kotek is winning Washington County by 19. Right there is a third of the electorate. And then in Clackamas County, Newt Bueller won Clackamas County by 4. I think Christine Drazen's up by 5 right now in Clackamas County. So you have this whole political environment that looks so different than it did 4 years ago for all sorts of reasons that we could talk about, but different. And these margins in the metro area didn't change. And that's considering the fact too that Portland was such a central focus of the statewide race. All the ads, the issues. Portland was an issue and an idea that was central to this race, and yet the margins didn't move at all. And so I can look back and say it makes sense for reasons we might discuss tonight. But if you ask me walking into this election, would Republicans make some progress in Multnomah County? I'd say, well, maybe a few points, make some progress in Washington County, maybe a few points, and they lost ground in Washington County. And I certainly thought they'd pick up ground in Clackamas County, where Christine Drazen is from. And so for me, just those are a surprise and really just speak to the deep challenges that exist for Republicans statewide in Oregon.
Thank you. Also provocative. All right, we'll move along. I'm going alphabetically, and then I'm going to reverse or move the order in the next round. So next is Dr. Chi.
First, thank you for inviting me for this panel. It's very, very, it's my honor to being here. And at the same time, I like to show some of the perspective nationally first. Before the election, we have the prediction like we will have a right wave generally nationally, but actually did not show up like that. It did not materialize. At the same time, we cannot tell it's kind of like big win for Democrats. It's not like that at all. We have the Oregon 5 of the 5th district. We have Oregon the 2nd district. They all win by the Republicans and a very small margin, especially associated with Oregon the 5th. And it may part of like partially because we have a redistricting the map of that and some of the peoples and some of the dynamic of the especially the demographic variables and people change there. But at the same time, it's far like the Democrats win the whole things, especially in the Oregons. It's not just like that, even though we still control the state legislature, but in general, especially for the congressional election in 2022 election, there are some nuance associated with the election. At the same time, very surprisingly, we have the discussion of the governors and also, for example, Rene Gonzalez on some of the issues. It's not quite like the politicians there. They're not all of them. They're very progressive associated with issue politics, and that can be another concern associated with Oregon and especially Portland. In general, we have some kind of discussions associated with Republicans and Democrats and also about their issue politics. On the other hand, it seems like Democrats and Republicans, they still battle with some kind of issues and against each other on policing and on gun rights. And we also talk about transportations here and there and homeless people. So it's still hard to tell and hard to say about that. And even though we do not have a right wave materialized based on the prediction before, we cannot say like the democracy is pretty solid or like the Democrats will just be there and hold the power for the election and for the next term, especially. I think that is my answer in general. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex.
Yeah, so this is what I get for being at the end of the alphabet. Anna stole my answer, but I think it's worth underscoring, to be honest, yeah, I was pretty surprised that the city charter reform package passed so easily in Portland. Almost, I think, 20% difference between those in opposition and those in support. And like Anna said, there was a huge coalition of folks behind it, including a sitting city councilor, deep-pocketed folks throwing money kind of at the movement to create an alternative to the charter reform, proposing something on the horizon that could be something maybe more appealing to the proposal going forward. And it was confusing. It was, frankly, as a reporter, it was a lot to unpack, and a lot of it was placed on kind of the media to unpack that. So I do think that was, for me, the most surprising. And even looking back now, right when it passed, it was I feel like it was called pretty early in the night on November 8th. And that to me was surprising. I was expecting it to be kind of one of those last kind of close calls. But I think it does reflect how hungry Portlanders are for change. They saw opportunity on the ballot to overhaul the entire form of government, and they took it. So that's the biggest surprise for me, even though it's shared among other folks.
Okay, I'm going to reverse some of the order of questions that I was planning on, because I want to stick with the charter amendment for a moment, since both Alex and Anna talked about it. This is a question that I find particularly interesting, which is, given the high vote margin in support of the charter amendment, on the one hand, how do you explain the high vote margin for Rene Gonzalez against Joanne Hardesty in the same election? How do you analyze that? And maybe Anna, I'll jump back to you and let you all have a crack at that one.
Alex, do you want to go first?
If I'm allowed, sure, yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're all going to say something maybe around the same lines. I mean, to me, I think this says that Portland voters are just really eager for something different, something new. They're unhappy with the status quo. We've heard over the past couple of years just growing upset around crime, around homelessness, around kind of any issue, and that a lot of that has been pinned on incumbent candidates like the incumbent city commissioner Joanne Hardesty, and on the current form of government. A lot of times in city council, you hear a lot of the issues that aren't being resolved. It's because our form of government, we're siloed, we can't process things in the system we have, and so that hearing that again and again from both sides, I think there is an instinct from voters to say, okay, if these are the reasons why, if the current state of our government right now and the current folks in city council are the reasons why things aren't going the way that I want and that the community would benefit from, then let's flip the table. Let's just start from scratch. Let's do something new. I do think there's a lot to be said that Commissioner-elect Rene Gonzalez was elected because he was someone different. He wasn't someone on city council. He wasn't Joanne Hardesty. And at the same time, it should be acknowledged that the voters who supported Gonzalez were not the same necessarily as the ones who voted for charter reforms. I believe Gonzalez himself and members of his campaign kind of actively opposed the charter reforms that were on the ballot. So, and those two campaigns were just at odds during the campaign itself. So I think, and I also think, John can probably speak to this, there's some polling that shows that, by precincts across the city too, there was pretty disparate percentages of, who was voting for charter versus Gonzalez, and those were split. But, bottom line, I think it comes down to people wanting something different. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
John, should I let you go next? Or Anne, are you ready?
I certainly can. I mean, I think I'm largely going to echo what Alex said. I don't think these results are contradictory. I think Portland voters, more than anything else, are just frustrated with the direction of the city. And I think we're going through a moment in time in which this is a place going through a little bit of an identity crisis. This is the third straight city council election in which an incumbent has been defeated. It's the second consecutive city council race in which you've had a liberal woman who ran promising some specific things, who did exactly what she said she was going to do, and got punished for it by voters. And I think Ted Wheeler and Mingus Mapps and Rene Gonzalez are all going to make a huge mistake if they assume this round of election results are a mandate for a different kind of government. I think more than anything else right now, Portlanders are just frustrated and don't really know what they want, and don't really know what the solutions are for these really intractable problems that we're facing.
I might only just to pick up on what Alex was saying about just the geography of these two elections, that in the city council race, Rene Gonzalez did best west of the river and east of 205. And then the charter commission, the charter reform election, that did best sort of the inner east side of Portland, so basically did best where Hardesty did best. So I do think that voters were absolutely anxious to say yes to stuff. But the fact that the two maps are different, it says that I think they were anxious to say yes to stuff, and those progressive voters that were Hardesty voters found attributes of the charter change especially attractive. And I think that those things are making the case that charter is going to help lead to a more diverse council through multi-member districts and single transferable vote. And I know opponents don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think that was a persuasive case made to progressive voters or Hardesty voters. So charter had this opportunity because people were mad And then because of the way it was structured, it was particularly, and then who supported it, it was particularly attractive to the types of voters who also voted for Hardesty.
Dr. Chi, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like, I'd like to refer a little bit to Anna and John on some of their thinkings, and very impressive. At the same time, I'd like to mention a little bit about identity politics specifically by focusing on this kind of issues associated with the charter and also the competition between these two candidates associated with city councilors. It's really hard to say at this point because the homeless issues and gun safety check, especially we will talk a little bit about gun safety measures later, it will disproportionately affect some marginalized group of people and some, let's say, the marginalized people, all immigrants, or the other racial identities. So it's very hard for this measure to benefit all of the peoples. That's part of the reason Portland, the people and the voters here, they want to at least show their enthusiasm associated with this issue politics. And back to the charter reform, we also have a very interesting difference compared to previous situation. We adopt ranked choice voting about this kind of reform, which means they will give the voters for more choices. At least we can just put a preference there for the first preference, second preference, and third preference. Back to the previous measures, we use like, okay, you can only choose one of your favorite candidate. But at this time and later, we can do something associated with like ranking these candidates, which provide some opportunities to the voters. At the same time, there are some nuance as well, because you will definitely have more political knowledge or be more political sophisticated to know which candidate will represent you better based on the situation. And also we have the result, like the Ronnie Gonzalez win the election. It's signal something there because he is a centralist on some of the issues and not very progressive in supporting for example, the domestic and other policies associated with Portland. So it's very, very hard to tell. There's some nuance and balance associated with all this kind of situation.
But
yeah.
I want to ask all of you an additional question, which is how do you see the next 2 years playing out with this new council when so much of their time and energy is going to be spent getting us to the new charter place? I mean, it seems to me they're going to be so preoccupied with that it's going to make getting anything else done rather difficult. I don't know. That's just my own prejudice. So let's start with you, John. You're right there on the screen next to me, I guess.
Well, how it's going to work in City Hall, like Alex is probably the best person to answer that, but I'll say I've been asking the same question. And what I've been thinking about is they're all lame ducks, but it's the government itself is a lame duck at this point. And so what do they see as their role, their responsibility, or their responsibility perhaps to not do things? If they're all going to be replaced and the government's going to be replaced in 2 years. Of course, there's countervailing pressures to that. They're all, well, I think some of them are ambitious folks who want to be mayor or some other office and need to make their mark with the voters. They also may be looking at this and saying, this is my 2 years to do something. And I got to do it. So I simply don't know, but and whatever happens will surprise me. But the universe of possibilities to me seem quite wide, and I feel pretty uncertain, and I'm very curious what the others have to think.
Anna, you want to go next?
Now it's chaos. What I do expect to see is immense pressure brought on members of this council to do two things: to get much tougher on homelessness and kind of quality of life crimes very quickly before we have a new, likely much more diverse, both philosophically and demographically, council, and come under immense pressure to slow down the transition to a new form of government through whatever processes they can possibly come up with.
You mean by the new form of government, do you mean the getting away from the commission system, or do you mean the new form of elections?
Both of those changes. They are being asked to do, the folks who are going to be doing redistricting, new districting, not even redistricting, are what they're being asked to do very quickly is it's a big responsibility and an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in a quick period of time. And there are a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of political influence out there who are going to, I suspect, use that to really push Mayor Wheeler and members of the council to slow down this process if there are legal means to do that.
Alex?
Yeah, to kind of go off of what Anna said, there are the biggest kind of power brokers in the city right now who know how to influence policies and issues that are passed through City Hall. They know how to use the current system really well. They know how to, cut corners, maybe, talk to the right folks, manipulate in some ways the current form of government in a way that works in their favor, and that has worked for a long time to get things through. I can see in the next couple of years, whether it's, those powers that be kind of slowing things down, or them kind of rushing to make sure there's some things established or that are, set in stone before we turn into a form of government that has a city administrator who's more of a gatekeeper when it comes to a lot of these things. Where, I see city commissioners in the next couple of years being heavily pressured, I think, by outside interests, deep-pocketed outside interests to kind of cement and finalize maybe proposals or plans that have been in the works for a while, or that have been, on the back burner for a minute, to get those in place before there was this new kind of complete overhaul. At the same time, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the next couple of years, and that's really exciting for me. And I think should be exciting for everyone, because it's an experiment that I think will be pretty eye-opening. I do think that city commissioners will be working less to set up the new form of government than city staff and these committees that are kind of going to be convened to address districting and rulemaking and what happens next. And for members of city council who want to stay on council, I think these next couple of years it's an opportunity for them to really prove why they should stay on council. Especially for I think about incoming Commissioner Rene Gonzalez. He was elected to a seat that usually has 4 years to make an impact and to impress voters to be reelected, and now he has, with this new form of government, he's just got a couple years before there's a whole new election for this new form of government. So yeah, it's a wide open field.
Right. Do you want to add anything, Dr. Chi?
I think Alex just almost have my point there. It's very, very detailed and comprehensive. I'd like to add a little bit more associated with the system. Because we have a ranked choice model right now compared to the previous one, it seems like we will have more choice associated with like electing officials. At the same time, it will slow down a little bit about the whole, both the system and making decisions or making policies. We will have 12 city councilors, and compared to previously, we will have 4 commissioners and 1 mayors, which means the more people will be there, it will be a very demographic and also very the selective and have some issues discussion among these people. At the same time, it will slow down a little bit about whole things associated with issues. It's sort of combinations, but I myself is positive about the whole thing as well. Let's see and wait. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move us away from the city charter and ask you more about the state elections, because while the Democrats maintained a majority in both houses of the state legislature, the majority obviously narrowed. There was movement to the right in some of the Marion County, for example, and Yamhill County. There's an unusually large number of new first-time legislators. Some of, I think, a larger number than usual of diverse backgrounds. So what impact do you think that will have? And I've sort of lost track of the order. So I'm going to start with you, Alex.
Sorry, I got to find that mute button. Yeah, so it's interesting to think about what the Democrats not having a supermajority in either the Senate or House will look like when it comes to, necessary collaboration at the state level. I focus a lot on just Portland and City Hall and kind of how state issues maybe impact the city or vice versa. And one interesting thing that stood out to me that I heard today during a council work session was that, at least according to the city's government relations team, following the recent state redistricting, this is the first time that all 27 legislatures representing Portland are all Democrats. So which it has been a majority for quite some time, but the fact that, it's 100% Democratic Portland representatives at the Capitol, I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what that alignment looks like and if it's reflected in any certain, way at the state house, despite Democrats losing a few seats statewide. From the city perspective, I know that, the mayor and city council, they're really counting on the state this next session and future sessions to greenlight funding to backfill these big budgeted proposals around housing and homelessness, specifically this one that has been introduced to ban street camping and force unsheltered folks into city-run outdoor encampments. And it's interesting because this budgetary ask feels more like a bipartisan issue than almost than other budget asks from the city in the past. It's something that I think across the board, Oregon lawmakers see homelessness and housing shortage across the state as a critical issue, and folks who aren't necessarily progressive or Democratic leaning see that a ban on camping and that kind of this harder prosecutorial angle on homelessness might be the right answer. So I just kind of connecting the dots between what the city is going to have to do to convince folks at the state level to give them funding for this proposal, maybe other proposals, that could be not hampered as much by whether or not there's a Democratic majority or not. But that isn't necessarily my forte, so we'll see.
All right. John, you want to take that one next?
How it's going to play out in Salem, in the Capitol, I don't know, and I don't know the keys, but you're going to give me entree to talk about two things maybe three things quickly that I do think are really interesting. One, you mentioned Marion County. Marion County is a fascinating in this election. It went for Biden in 2020, and it went for Joey Perkins in 2022. So Marion County, it's a purplish county, and so you have a back and forth. Maybe isn't a shock, but given the differences between those two people, I think is
you might want to tell the audience who Perkins is.
It's interesting that I would need to explain that, but I probably do, right? She's Republican nominee candidate for United States Senate. And the reason you might have to say something is because she had no money to spend because she's not a credible candidate. She's not a credible candidate because she's a QAnon adjacent conspiracy theorist. I try to keep my partisan comments to an absolute bare minimum, but I feel pretty confident in saying that about her. And she won Marion County, the same county that Biden won. So that's, you had mentioned Marion County in your setup. So that's just one thing to call out. About the legislature, something that I've been tracking for a while, and I think it's imperative that we all recognize it and think about how it affects our politics, is that Democrats hold, this is in the House, we have 60 House seats. Democrats hold every single House seat with above average, or excuse me, where the constituents have above average college attainment. They hold 28 of the top 30 districts where they have of the highest levels of college attainment in the state. So you have legislators in Salem who represent Washington County, where you have 70% of your constituents that have a college degree, and you have Republican legislators, often in rural Eastern Oregon. A lot of their districts have 15-20% college education. If you want to if you know nothing else about a district, but how many people have a college degree, it's almost a perfect predictor whether or not it's going to be blue or red. And those sorts of, education is a proxy for so many things: how we talk, what issues are important, what our values are. And that is, those legislators are going to be taking that with them to Salem. And so that's one thing for us to reflect upon. And then just one other quickly, there are 76 seats up, legislative seats in the House and the Senate. So 60 in the House, 60 in the House and 15 in the Senate, plus one special election. Of those 76, there are only 6 seats where the out party won, meaning where the representative representing that district does not, his or her party does not have the registration advantage in the district. Those are all Republicans in quote unquote Democratic districts. There was a comment in the chat about just 41% of Oregons aren't registered Ds or Rs right now. And that number, that's just 6 out of 76, just tells you how important those primaries are. And really just getting through the primary, through a closed partisan primary is what matters. And that is going to be taken to Salem too, and how they think about their constituents and how at risk or not they are for re-election.
That's a lot. I wish we had 4 hours, but okay. Anna, do you want to go on with this?
Sure. I mean, I think the reality in Oregon is moderates in both parties have had a really hard time in Salem in the last few years. And we talk a lot about the battle over what the Republican Party is going to be and how Trump has fundamentally remade that party. The reality is the Democratic Party has its own identity war taking place right now. And we've seen it play out in the legislature, especially between the ascendant progressive wing of the Democratic Party and older school moderates. And the reality of where we're going to be with the Democrats not having the supermajority is that moderates in both parties have an opportunity to show us what bipartisanship can actually look like. But the reality that John just pointed out about how important those party primaries are, and the fundamental reality that the people who turn out in party primaries tend to be, they are the more extreme base for both Republicans and Democrats, makes me a little skeptical that bipartisan will actually happen. The media's talked, voters have talked about the job that Kate Brown has done as governor. Tina Kotek walks into a much harder job than the one that Kate Brown had for the last few years.
Oh, yeah. End of comment. Yes, absolutely. Dr. Chi.
Yeah, I think John did a pretty good job in just addressing the situation right now, and he's expert, especially for the state legislature. I'm not quite expert on that area, but I want to add something on that. He mentioned like the education is a big part associated with turnout, especially for Democrats, and I do agree with that. But for this election, there's some issue politics as well, especially in Oregon and Portland. We talk about homeless, we talk about policing, we talk about housing and taxation as well. So there's some nuance on that, especially these issues are pretty have pretty different standing point associated with these two parties. That may be the part of the reason like people, yes, for most people, they have a higher education background. They definitely support Democrats, but they may have some other issue concerns as well, especially for some of the people who is moderator or maybe independent or lean Democrats. They have other thinkings associated with situations. So that's the part of the reason when we talk about that there's no national red wave for the election. At the same time, we cannot tell it's like a big win for the Democrats, especially in the Oregon state. It's not like that at all. Still have something. And as Anna just pointed out, it's very hard for Tina to just like do something associated with situations, and we'll look forward to that. But that's the point. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, there's so much to dig into, but I'm gonna move us to this question, which is how did Oregon's election results mirror what you saw across the country? And in what ways did we defy any national trends? I don't know who to start with. I think Dr. Chi, I'll start with you. Since you just finished, I'll go backwards this time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, I think John, Anna, and Alex are much more expert in state legislature, and I do more on national part. So I'm like, I'm not quite sure on that, but I will tell something. But you expert, you do that part. Yeah, for the national part, I'd say Oregon still did a pretty good job, especially for the Senate and the governor, and we still occupy the 4 seats for the House of Representatives, another two seats by Republicans, the District 5th and the 5th district and the 2nd district. So it's still like pretty decent result associated with the national election. At the same time, for example, we have a very small margin associated with the Oregon 5th district. They're showing some kind of like power dynamic change. It's very small margin, but before we have Democrats incumbent and we have Republican challenger, and then we have Republican who just win the election, it's Lori, I think, and it means something there, maybe associated with issues, maybe associated with some other concerns in Oregon specifically. And also I mentioned before, like maybe also associated with withdraw the district. There are some kind of like demographic variables or demographic concerns because people have different identities or racial identity or gender identity or other identities. They have some preference associated with issues. So withdraw the district would have some benefit to, especially benefit Republican this time. So that's my kind of like takeaways from this 2022 election. I still think Oregon did a pretty good job. I like here. I really love here and I really like the result, especially there is no big right wave. I just, oh, that's good. Even though we cannot say like the Democrats like did a pretty good job, but at least not a bad job this time. Yeah. Thank you.
John, do you want to comment on either
Sure.
the 5th district or the country?
The 6th district is interesting too, but I'll just how Oregon compares to the country. If your mindset, if you got locked into a mindset, this was going to be a big Republican year you thought that on November 7th, then if you're a Republican in Oregon, you're sad about these election results because it didn't materialize what you'd hoped. And certainly Republicans believed that they had a chance in the governor and had a good chance of at least tying the Senate, maybe even winning the Senate, and those things didn't happen. But if you compare it to what we know on November 9th, the day after, and we look at Republicans don't have that wave, you probably would think in that environment that Oregon's going to be as blue or bluer than it's been before. And that's not what happened. So I think Oregon actually defied, considering we're a blue state, defied some of those national trends. And that governor's race was close, but Republicans picked up a congressional district. They clawed back some of those seats in the legislature. They made progress in a lot of local races across the state too, particularly in the metro area with Clackamas and Yamhill County standing out. So if you were Republican, you didn't know what the projections were, and you only knew what happened nationally, I think you'd look at these re-election results and say, hey, we did pretty good. Of course, the expectations were that it was going to be better. And so, it really does, I think, matter how you frame your expectations in terms of how you interpret these election results.
Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo what other folks have said about, the talk about the red wave nationally, and what that looked like in Oregon. While I think we dodged obviously a massive red wave, I think compared to past Oregon elections, it's still remarkable to, see Republicans gain seats in Salem and to grab another congressional seat. And at the local level, Portland City Council, we're seeing the most conservative body of elected officials that City Hall has seen in decades. All of the five city commissioners are politically progressive because this is Portland, but far more centrist than previous configurations. And I think Anna mentioned this earlier. Over the past 5 years, we've seen some of the most kind of leftist city commissioners who were elected kind of in these big, referendums on current city politics, like Chloe Eudaly and Joanne Hardesty. We've seen them be ousted after a term by more moderate candidates. And, this is, like Anna said, despite both those candidates doing exactly what they promised voters they do in council or running for office. And so, I think it's interesting to think about what that says about the future of folk, what our city council looks like. Voters say they want progressive leaders. Portland says it's this progressive bastion, but when they see that leadership in practice, they're no longer that interested. And so I think nationally we see obviously kind of this resistance to a massive red conservative wave in the election results. But locally and micro local level, there has been a shift to much more conservative when it comes to local politics, at least when it comes to the city council. I wouldn't say the same for, the county commission or, any of the leaders in those areas, but it is remarkable to see the shift in just a number of years of how much more centrist, I guess, the city council has become, and just the general lack of confidence maybe in progressive commissioners from voters.
And we'll see what happens when we have 12 from 4 districts.
Right. I think that'll be a real test of voters' political interest. They'll see this a completely clean slate in some ways, an opportunity for folks to come out of the woodwork who might not have felt welcome or able to run for office before. It's expected to be a more equitable system. So that will, that'll be its own means test.
Anna, you want to add something here?
Sure, just quickly, because everybody's made really smart points. I think both parties walked away breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief this year. Republicans really benefited from voter anger. Democrats really benefited from the Dobbs decision and from the fact that as an organizing force, the Oregon Republican Party is something of a dumpster fire. Republicans did really well in Oregon when you consider their party is a complete mess. And until the Republican Party becomes something much better organized and capable of fielding serious candidates across the board, this is about as good as I think it can possibly get for them.
Okay, we have time if any one of you wants to speak to any one of the statewide measures, the gun control one or the healthcare for all one, I guess we can call it. If you have any thoughts on those, and the unexcused absences one, pick one if you want, pick all 3 if you want, but if you have some comments on any of those, kind of raise your hand and let me know if you want to say something about them. All right, nobody's volunteering. John, you indicated that you might have something to say.
The only thing I might, it's a question. It's not even, I don't have any analysis. I'm just curious how the lack of the supermajorities now in the legislature interact with the Measure 113, the anti-walkout measure.
Right.
And I don't know, but my hope is that the diminished threat of walkouts with the less ability for Democrats to pass things without any Republican support would create dual pressures for folks to work together. In practice, I'm not really. I don't have a good feel for whether 113 would be put to use, for one thing. I'll say I'm skeptical that it would actually be used. And then how Republicans may be able to think about gaming that system. So anyway, those are questions. I'm not really sure, but I'll be curious to watch if and how those two factors interact with each other.
Any of the other? Yes, Dr. Cheek, go.
As I said, I'm not the expert of state legislature at all, but I do have some concerns about this gun safety check, especially some of you have already mentioned, like, it seems like the Portland politics drags from progressive to the centralist right now. And it seems like there's a wave associated with that, especially nationally. Joe Biden didn't do anything associated with 2022 election, but the Trump did something in supporting some of the bad candidate. So the moderator Biden seems like is a part of the reason the Democrat did not lose a lot associated with this election. So back to the gun safety check, it's like the city council and the measure, I think is 114, right? It seems like the city council want to do something to regulate the whole situation, but not in a very progressive ways. So I'd say it will disproportionately affect some of the marginalized group, because the background check always something associated with the voter ID law, associated with gun, the safety background check. But at the same time, it seems like there is a trend to drag the policies from progressive policies to the central standpoint policies. I do not know whether it's a trend or not, because nationally it seems like something happened on that trend as well. I'm not quite sure this is a trend in the Oregon or in Portland, but it seems like something's there. Yeah, that is my concern and thinkings. Thank you.
Alex, anything, or Anna, anything you want to throw into this conversation about the statewide ballot measures?
I mean, I was surprised Measure 114, the gun safety measure, passed, given that you had people on the right, obviously, who are going to oppose any toughening of gun laws. And you had some people on the left who were very concerned about putting the power to issue permits in the hands of law enforcement. So I was, and especially in a year when voters are just generally frustrated, and gun measures are always hard to pass. That one surprised me, and I'm going to be really curious to see how the courts come down now that the execution of that is sort of in the hands of the courts.
Yeah. Alex, anything?
No, nothing to add aside from what's been mentioned. I'm definitely interested to see how both Measure 113 and 114 will play out in reality. There's always that kind of waiting period to see kind of if they'll actually be actually be used the way they're supposed to be, or upheld by, in Measure 14's case, upheld by sheriffs.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that. Okay, so here's our last question before we go to audience questions. Excuse me. And it's a kind of open-ended one. Did this election leave you feeling more or less hopeful about democracy? I'll start with you, Anna.
Is that what I get for not having a poker face?
Yes.
I mean, my view on this changes every few minutes. I mean, I saw somebody in the chat mention that Southwest Washington congressional race in which Joe Kent, the Trumpiest of Trump-endorsed Republican candidates, lost. And this is not a partisan thing. It's more just, it was a little bit reassuring to see some of our worst instincts not rewarded by voters in Southwest Washington. And that, I think that's democracy working the way democracy is supposed to work. At the same time, I do look at the makeup of the state legislature this year and coming into next year and wonder how much is actually going to get done when, as we talked about earlier, we have given people an opportunity to show us bipartisanship. Nothing in recent political discourse suggests that bipartisanship is something that either party is all that interested in. So, we had elections and they went well, and election deniers in Oregon and Washington were generally repudiated, which I think is a good thing. But I'm curious to see how people actually behave once they're in office.
Okay, Alex, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, to kind of jump on what Anna just mentioned, I think one test of whether democracy is healthy or not is, seeing how the election system ran. And I think this general election was kind of prime for election denying because of this new law that in some ways delays the end result of all counted ballots, because the postmark rule where you can turn in your ballot the day of election day and have it still be counted, but it kind of takes a while to count all of those. So results were going to be delayed a little bit. And, going into election day as, someone who reports on kind of election results and wants to be factual about what the results are, that navigating that kind of made me a little nervous that folks were going to try to poke holes in kind of the results. And I was grateful to see even in just, the speeches we heard from the candidates for governor on election night, everyone, all three women kind of mentioned that, hey, we have to wait for the ballots to be counted. This is just how the system goes. There was no kind of allegations of mischief or whatever it might be. And so I feel like just in general, that is a good sign of democracy in Oregon, which is very proud of its election system. And regarding hope in democracy, that's a tricky one. As a cynic, it's hard to find hope sometimes in the way that the cards fall after elections. But I'm hopeful about the potentials within our current state of democracy to experiment with change. Like I said, that I'm really looking forward to following the rollout of the city's charter, the change of government in the charter measure, and kind of the influences it will have on the way elected officials make decisions and can maybe actually move the needle on some issues or not. It's I don't think that that having a perfect fix to our city's government is necessarily the ideal solution for a good democracy. I think having kind of a messy fix and figuring it out as we go and kind of seeing where the gaps are and seeing where the holes are and being able to understand that as a city and as voters is important. I think it'll be fascinating to follow and track, and I think it's an opportunity for Portlanders to be really involved in just seeing how democratic decisions and governments are made, and the potential to have a more representative form of government is certainly democratic. So sure, I'm hopeful.
Good. Dr. Chi.
Yeah, I myself are pretty optimistic about democracy, and I just want to address 2 points. First of all, we have a charter reform. That is definitely something to show more opportunities to the voters. Even though some of the colleagues here, they talk about it will be maybe slow and maybe not effective, But for example, the ranked choice model and will provide more opportunities for voters to at least list 3 candidates there, and to make sure their voice will be heard. And beforehand, we can only just like select 1 candidate there. So it's definitely something. And at the same time, I'd like to mention a little bit about the voter turnout. People are very engaged in this election, and it's the second highest. The first highest midterm election back to 2018. Because like Trump got the position and all the people like, oh, we definitely need to do something, or we need to go there and vote, whatever. And this one, the second highest midterm election throughout, I think, around 30 years about these midterm elections. And students at Reed College, they just debate a lot. And we have this kind of like midterm election night watch party, and they debate and discuss a lot. I can tell they engage in these kind of situations, and they have passions there. And this kind of like high turnout associated with midterm election is definitely tell something, even though we still have some debate on the issues, on some kind of like Republicans will be here and there and talk about other things, but the turnout definitely means something. At the same time, the Republican Party have some, because previously we talked about Republican Party, they're much more united. It's just like, okay, we have this kind of standpoint and ideologies here, but for this election, there are some drawbacks or setbacks. Some of the candidates, they just want to distance themselves with Trump. And some of the candidates, they do not want to have the close conversation with him, and actually they win election. For example, DeSantis in Florida. So there's something there for the Republican as well. So these are 3 things. I think I'm still very positive, and I myself is pretty positive about everything. I can always find a good point. But at the same time, I'd like to mention for the charter reform in Poland and the Oregon is definitely something to provide more opportunities for the voter and some of the change, even though we need to keep our eyes there. But it's definitely something. At the same time, the voter turnout is pretty high this time, and the Republican is not as unified as Euro before. It's definitely something good point for the Democrats, because Democrats did nothing this time. And actually, the result is not that bad compared to previous election, because we always have some setback associated with midterm election back to 2018, the Trump administration, back to 2014, Obama administration. There's always around 50 or 60 seats lost associated with their incumbent party. But this time, just like single-digit numbers. So it's like, oh, really something. But for more details, we really need to just keep our eyes there. Yeah, but I'm very positive. I'm still positive about democracy.
Okay, John, you get the final word on democracy here.
Sure. There's obviously big things that we've been talking about. The folks before me did a good job of describing. January 6th, election denialism, all that sort of stuff gives us pause and worry, and candidates who are running on that should give us concern. But it often outshines the positives, and there's lots of positives, I think, and here's one for you. Since 2020, when a lot of this really, these sort of efforts really began in earnest, in Oregon, about 2/3 of local funding measures have passed across the state in all the elections since then. Which says to me that local elected officials have a pretty good sense of what their communities are interested in, what they value, and that local voters are willing to continue to invest in their communities using the democratic process. So those are, whether each one of those or any one of those individual funding measures is good or bad, I don't have an opinion about that, but I think the fact that we see that high level of success at the local level of those ballot measures tells me that voters we believe in the process, and voters are willing to continue to participate and support their communities through it.
Those are all very upbeat and helpful answers. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to James Afsink, who's going to take us through some of the questions that have been posed by the audience in the chat.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to all the audience members who have been submitting questions. I'm going to continue curating them for maybe another 10 minutes. So if you have a really excellent question, please still feel free to put it in the chat. Our first question, I think, can speak to the areas of expertise of all of our panelists in different ways. So this question asks, what did this election tell you about women voters? And follows up, are women voters even an entity? Is that a block that, votes in one direction or the other? And then there was also some question about that reproductive rights motivated voters nationwide, and how Oregon aligned or misaligned or aligned differently with that, and what it means for women in politics overall. So I know that's a very kind of broad question, but I thought that folks would probably have a bunch of different angles on it. I don't know, Dr. Chi, if maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We actually just talked about issue politics today in my class we finished at 3 p.m. today. And students talk about abortion and talk about inflation and gun rights today in the class. And abortion, and we also use the reproductive rights. It's definitely something in 2022 election. This is a big issue just discussed nationally, and definitely drive the voters associated with the result. We have a Kansas election before. It seems like Kansas is pretty red, but the women there, they just like change the whole result, especially associated with abortion. And then we have 2022 election, and the nationally women voters especially are very focused on these issues, and not just women voters or female voters. Also, we have the Gen Z, the very young generations. They have pretty high turnout this time as well, especially maybe so associated with the issue politics. Abortion will have some impact on their own interest. So they show up because in general, turnout, like the older people would have a higher turnout compared to the younger people in general nationally, but issue politics drive them into some kind of discussion associated with the result, especially 2022. It's a big year for the abortion right. We have this Supreme Court, a very famous and very just like controversial issue discussed in the Supreme Court and among these justices, and especially controlled by the conservative right now. So like nationally and the locally, this is a very significant issue in the 2022 election, which drives maybe the good result for the Democrats. It's different compared to other elections in the previous years. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I do agree with that.
Thank you, Dr. Chi. I'm not going to specify an order, so I don't know, Anna, John, Alex, one of you wants to hop in?
I think you have to call on somebody, James. It's not going to work. You have to start.
All right, fine. Anna, what do you think?
Sure. I mean, I yield to John as the guy who knows the numbers, but there's a reason that in the last days of the campaign, Tina Kotek decided to go negative and really hit Christine Drazan hard, particularly on abortion. That is an issue that is so fundamental in terms of many Oregonians, why they vote Democratic and why they would not vote for Republican for governor. And I think it maybe is the reason Tina Kotek's the governor-elect.
John, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know for sure what the outcomes is going to be absent Dobbs. A couple of things that I think cut, or at least complicate the story. One, turnout is up nationally, but turnout's down in Oregon. Turnout's down in Multnomah County. Mm-hmm. The margin is closer now than it was in 2018. So if abortion was an issue that was really going to drive voters broadly, it was really going to motivate Democrats to vote Democrat. Well, I don't know, it doesn't look like, based on those numbers, that happened. I do definitely think that there are Democrats who would have been Betsy curious, maybe even Drazan curious, but couldn't get there because of abortion. The other thing I might say, this isn't about the election outcome, but it ties back to something I was talking about earlier, I think it does, which is women are increasingly voting Democratic. Young women especially are voting Democratic. The DR split among young voters is becoming quite large. And there's probably lots of reasons for that. Abortion could be one, social policies for any number of things could be one. But frankly, women are just going to school longer. They're getting degrees, and gentlemen aren't. And to the extent that education is a divider in our politics, that's becoming a gender divide, or at least those two are working in pair to perhaps push men and women further apart politically.
Interesting. That is not the angle I expected to hear. Alex, what else?
Yeah, I mean, I think what, I agree with a lot of what everyone said kind of about the timing of the Dobbs decision. I'm curious, just from like a social science perspective, what that timing did to influence elections, both locally, statewide, nationally. And it did seem to add fuel to the fire to the Kotek campaign. At the same time, I'm thinking kind of locally, I know that Commissioner Hardesty campaigned, with a pretty strong pro-choice bent, and while on City Council, she has helped champion a couple of proposals to help fund abortion funds in the state that help folks from out of town or out of state come to Oregon to access abortion care. And has been a champion in those ways, has been backed by Planned Parenthood and NARAL and the other groups. And so if that is a measurement of kind of where Portland women are focused, and if that was something that they care deeply about, you might have seen something differently in that outcome. Also, she didn't kind of bring the hammer down in the way that Tina Kotek did in the final days against her opponent. I don't believe Renee Gonzalez has, I think he certainly supports abortion access and women's rights. And so, that's just me kind of conflating the statewide race to the national or to the local one. So it's really hard to say kind of, what the influence of that decision and of just women voters' voices in general had on either election.
So changing gears a little bit, and Alex, I'm going to start this question with you, because I know the Mercury invests so much time and energy into creating your endorsement sheet, your voters guide for voters. And this question is, especially in a year when major endorsements split on a number of races, what influencers now affect voters' decisions, and how has that changed, over the last 10, 20 years, however long you've kind of been following it? Do we see it, is it individual influencers? Is it ideological groups like political party, newspapers, nonprofits? What is it that's really driving, how people are making their voters' decisions from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I do not have the answer to. I certainly know that whoever the Mercury endorses doesn't mean that we across the ballot convince the electorate to vote for folks. It was really interesting this year to see such a diversity of endorsements across the board and local endorsement or editorial boards and endorsement boards. And I think that, honestly, that is, like, when we're talking about what's good for democracy, I think having such strong and maybe smart arguments and ideas about different candidates coming from different sources is healthy and good. But I can, it's hard to say kind of who is the one, put with the finger in the scale when it comes to who's influencing voters and in what ways. I mean, I certainly think that the folks definitely turn to certain publications to guide their how they fill out their ballots, but they also there are more and more kind of advocacy groups and organizations that are also doing their work to put out endorsement guides. There are some endorsement guides around this year that looked very official, like they were coming from the Secretary of State's office. And so there are a lot of, it's hard for me to say kind of who's guiding voters right now. But there are certainly a lot of fingers in the pie.
How about Dr. Chi? Do you want to say anything from your knowledge about this?
I'm not quite sure about the answer, because I'm not expert there, and I think Alex already did a pretty good job in answering the question.
Thank you. Anna, do you have thoughts as a,
Sure.
journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I think the power of endorsements is very different today in an age of fragmented media, where we generally all self-select our media sources, versus the days when everybody read the Oregonian on Sundays and everybody watched certain TV news. And so I think the ways endorsements matter now, it's if you self-select as someone who reads the Mercury, reads the Willamette Week, reads the Bend Bulletin, reads the Oregonian, and that's your primary news source. If they endorse someone, that has power for you. Or if they endorse someone, it means you're going to vote against them. Which is, I think, how some people tend to use endorsements for any publications, certainly the ones I just mentioned. But I do think there's a power when you see a consensus of endorsements. And I was struck this year by the fact that you didn't see more news organizations, for example, endorsing Betsy Johnson or endorsing Christine Drazen. I do think that helped Tina Kotek quite a bit, because I do think there are voters out there, particularly moderate voters, who endorsements give them an out to vote for someone. I think that definitely happened. Portland liberals seeing some news organizations endorse Renee Gonzalez meant they were inclined to vote for the incumbent progressive Black woman who did the things she said she was going to do. Oh, but the Oregonian endorsed Renee Gonzalez. The Oregonian is pretty politically moderate. I have an out now. I personally, I work for a news organization that doesn't endorse. And I used to work for the Oregonian, and I can tell you every election cycle, it made the news reporters created a lot of really awkward conversations having to explain that's not us. I tend to think endorsements are a little bit outdated, particularly given that we all kind of choose our own diet and very few of us break outside our comfort zone when we, think about your own news sources.
Thanks, Anna. John, did you want to weigh in on this?
I'm going to weigh in quickly, and then it's going to give me a jumping off point to something else that it's quite related, but maybe a different direction you're thinking of, James, or whoever asked the question. One is I generally subscribe to the rule that the lower level or the endorsements make no difference at all for presidential races. They make a little difference maybe for gubernatorial races, particularly if, as Anna said, that they kind of cut across expectations and maybe give people permission to do something that they're looking for permission to do. And then they can matter quite a bit at lower level races where people have very limited information. What I want to use as a jumping off point for is the Multnomah County chair race. We did some polling. I've seen other polling soon before the election where 75% plus of voters said that they were undecided in that race. It's the largest county in the state, dealing with the most consequential issues in the community, and voters had absolutely no idea what the heck was going on. Now, I'm not naive about the fact about how much people pay attention to county government versus city government, but we also passed very strict campaign finance laws that left those two candidates with basically just a nickel to spend and to communicate their issues, priorities, their candidacies to voters. And so they were reliant on others. And I really look at how I think under-resourced and then therefore how under-informed voters were on that key race. It makes me worry about that election going forward, and potentially then the influence for whether they're endorsements, but particularly for outside groups that do have money to spend to really dominate how those campaigns, how those candidacies go.
That is a different direction than I thought you'd take it, but really fascinating. Thank you. So I think this is going to be the last audience question. We'll see. I mean, I guess it depends on how many folks want to weigh in on it. But this is a question about, in the kind of earlier comments, a number of you panelists said that, there was a real push that Portlanders want change, and that's kind of why they supported charter reform, but also why they voted in Commissioner-elect Gonzalez. And this question is, how does that match or conflate with Dan Ryan easily, winning his reelection just a few months earlier? And the person asking the question said, were there demographic differences that explain the change, or was there really just that much change in where voters were at between spring and fall? Or did voters not have enough of a record for Commissioner Ryan? Just the candidate that ran against him, or candidates that ran against him. What do people think? Has the sentiment of Portland voters changed tremendously over the last 6 months, or was there other stuff going on in that May election? And let's start with Alex.
Yeah, I can jump in on this. It's funny that election feels like years ago. But the May election for Dan Ryan's, I guess, first full term, because he was elected to fill in the remaining term of late city commissioner Nick Fish. He was facing a number of really unknowns. Folks who I think, kind of the leading candidate challenging him in that race was an activist who had been really involved in kind of protests in recent years and organizing, and had her name was kind of familiar in those circles, I think, but the other folks challenging him were pretty, unfamiliar faces and unexperienced kind of political folks. And I think one of the biggest things is that none of them had the kind of financial backing and support of the kind of, that we saw with Rene Gonzalez, who really came out of the woodwork as well. He did not really have any political backing or background, but did have a strong base of support from his organizing during kind of COVID among teachers and or among parents and families kind of wanting schools to reopen. So he had a really strong base. I think my suspicion on that is that there just wasn't the kind of baseline support for unknown challengers to Dan Ryan that we saw in Commissioner Hardesty's race, and the kind of support that went into the charter reform measure. I mean, if we're talking about voting for change, Portlanders want to vote for change, but they also probably want to make sure that there's they have confidence in what that change might be. So, on my very kind of scrappy understanding of how voters' minds are changed, I mean, that is my, I feel like that's the one conclusion I can kind of make, is just the lack of resources that challengers to Dan Ryan had at the time. And, kind of like what John said earlier, like the lack of information about different candidates that was out there, the lack of campaigning in general. I think Dan Ryan really just kind of like, slid in on his previous record, which was very short, and folks wanted just to see more of it maybe. But yeah, I'll stop rambling.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think we're going to have time for one last person to speak on this. I'm going to give it to you, Anna, if you want to weigh in on this same question.
I do. Thanks, Jim. How'd you know? I mean, Dan Ryan was a business-friendly white guy challenged from the left by activists who didn't have money to spend against him. Joanne Hardesty, a Black woman and outspoken liberal, challenged from the right by men who had money to spend, and also benefited from the fact that Joanne Hardesty, you could draw your own conclusions as to why, has been made the face of whatever has gone wrong in Portland by many groups pushing for more conservative candidates to win at the statewide level. You could argue that's patently unfair, since she is just a city commissioner, and there have been a procession of mayors who have not managed to solve the city's biggest problems. But I think that's the reality. It was just a very different race. And Dan Ryan did have a much lower profile on the council than Joanne Hardesty has had, and the people with money to spend didn't choose to run against him. They chose to run against her.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you all. I'm going to pass it back now to our moderator.
Yes, and I'm going to, again, thank you all, John Horvick, Anna Griffin, Dr. Dan Chi, and Alex Zelensky. You were fabulous, and we really appreciate your insights. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Debbie Kay.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, James, and thank you, panelists. This was a remarkable conversation, and I'm very grateful for it. I share Barbara's desire that we have more time to pursue some of these matters more broadly and more issues than we were able to cover this evening with your insights and the stimulating conversation. Thank you. We appreciate the critically important work that each of you is doing in election research, news coverage, and education. The League of Women Voters is an organization that exists to empower community engagement. You're part of a massive public community education process. We're grateful that you are serving our community and state through your dedication and hard work and your fields of expertise. The League is a membership organization, and we welcome you, all of our viewers, all of our participants, to join us. And although we are not participating in the vast area of Giving Tuesday today, we would certainly value all of your financial support in presenting this and other relevant programs. Please see our membership and donor information at our website, lwvpdx.org. We hope you will join us for another community education program in the future. In the meantime, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Portland, I wish you a happy holiday season and a healthy new year. Thank you very much.